My name's JC McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Morning and welcome to Miss Cleo's Storytelling Corner this morning. Oh, it's a beautiful day. You know, I thought it was going to be colder. I looked up the weather yesterday and it was going to be colder, but it's really a very nice day today. And I got this very heavy scarf on, wrapped it all around me and was sweating in the car, but it's a beautiful day, and I hope that all of you are having a really nice holiday season. Today, we're going to do some Charles Dickens. Let me show you. This Charles Dickens, you know, The Christmas Carol. I was just thinking and saying, how do they find so many words and so many stories? And it just fascinates, writers fascinate me, but a lot of people say I could be a writer, and I can think up stories in my head and tell them to you, but I've never really written a whole lot. But today we're going to read a story from Charles Dickens' Christmas stories, The Child's Story. I think I've told this to you once before, a couple of years ago, but this time I'm going to read it. Then we'll talk about it a little bit. Okay? The Child's Story. Once upon a time, a good many years ago, there was a traveler, and he set out upon a journey. It was a magic journey, and was to seem very long when he began it, and very short when he got halfway through. He traveled along a rather dark path for some little time without meeting anything or anybody until at last he came to a beautiful child. So he said to the child, "What do you do here?" And the child said, "I am always at play. Come and play with me." So he played with the child the whole day long, and they were very merry. The sky was so blue, the sun was so bright, the water was so sparkling, the leaves were so green, the flowers were so lovely, and they heard such singing birds and saw so many butterflies that everything was beautiful. This was in fine weather. When it rained, they loved to watch the falling drops and to smell the fresh scents. When it blew, it was delightful to listen to the wind and fancy what it said as it came rushing from its home. Where was that? They wondered, whistling and howling, driving the clouds before it, bending the trees, rumbling in the chimneys, shaking the houses, and making the sea roar in fury. But when it snowed, that was best of all, for they liked nothing so well as to look up at the white flakes falling fast and thick like downs from the breasts of millions of white birds, and to see how smooth and deep the drifts were, and to listen to the hush upon the path and roads. They had plenty of the finest toys in the world and the most astonishing picture books, all about scimitars and slippers and turbans and dwarfs and giants and genies and fairies and bluebeard and beanstalks and riches and caverns and forests and valentines and orsons, and all new and all true. But one day, of a sudden, the traveler lost the child. He called to him over and over again, but got no answer. So he went upon his road and went on for a little while without meeting anything, until at last he came to a handsome boy. So he said to the boy, "What do you do here?" And the boy said, "I am always learning. Come and learn with me." So he learned with that boy about Jupiter and Juno and the Greeks and the Romans, and I don't know what, and learned more than I could tell, or he either, for he soon forgot a great deal of it. But they were not always learning. They had the merriest games that ever were played. They rode upon the river in summer and skated on the ice in the winter. They were active afoot and active on horseback, at cricket and all games, at ball, at prisoners' base, hare and hounds, follow my leader, and more sports than I can think of. Nobody could beat them. They had holidays too, and the 12th cakes, and parties where they danced till midnight, and real theaters where they saw palaces of real gold and silver rise out of the real earth, and saw all the wonders of the world at once. As to friends, they had such dear friends, and so many of them, that I want the time to reckon them up. They were all young, like the handsome boy, and were never to be strange to one another all their lives through. Still, one day, in the midst of all these pleasures, the traveler lost the boy, as he had lost the child, and after calling to him in vain, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a young man. So he said to the young man, "What do you do here?" And the young man said, "I am always in love. Come, love with me." So he went away with that young man, and presently they came to one of the prettiest girls that ever was seen, just like Fanny in the corner there, and she had eyes like Fanny, and her hair like Fanny, and dimples like Fanny, and she laughed and colored just as Fanny does while I am talking about her. So the young man fell in love directly, just as somebody I won't mention the first time he came here did with Fanny. Well, he was teased sometimes, just as somebody used to be by Fanny, and they quarreled sometimes, just as somebody and Fanny used to quarrel, and they made it up and sat in the dark and wrote letters every day, and never were happy asunder, and were always looking out for one another and pretending not to. and were engaged at Christmas time, and sat close to one another by the fire, and were going to be married very soon. All exactly like somebody I won't mention and Fanny. But like somebody I won't mention and Fanny. But the traveler lost them one day, as he had lost the rest of his friends, and after calling to them to come back, which they never did, went on upon his journey. So he went on for a little while without seeing anything, until at last he came to a middle-aged gentleman. So he said to the middle-aged gentleman, "What are you doing here?" And his answer was, "I am always busy. Come and be busy with me." So he began to be very busy with that gentleman, and they went on through the woods together. The whole journey was through a wood, only it had been open and green at first, like a wood in spring, and now began to be thick and dark, like a wood in summer. Some of the little trees that had come out earliest were even turning brown. The gentleman was not alone, but had a lady of about the same age with him, who was his wife, and they had children who were with them too. So they all went on together through the wood, cutting down the trees and making a path through the branches and the fallen leaves, and carrying burdens and working hard. Sometimes they came to a long green avenue that opened into deeper woods. Then they would hear a very little distant voice crying, "Father, Father, I am another child. Stop for me." And presently they would see a very little figure, growing larger as it came along, running to join them. When it came up, they all crowded round it and kissed and welcomed it, and then they all went on together. Sometimes they came to several avenues at once, and then they all stood still, and one of the children said, "Father, I am going to sea," and another said, "Father, I am going to India," and another, "Father, I am going to seek my fortune where I can," and another, "Father, I am going to heaven." So with many tears at parting, they went solitary down those avenues, each child upon its way, and the child who went to heaven rose into the golden air and vanished. Whenever these partings happened, the traveler looked at the gentleman and saw him glance up at the sky above the trees, where the day was beginning to decline and the sunset to come on. He saw, too, that his hair was turning gray, but they never could rest long, for they had their journey to perform, and it was necessary for them to be always busy. At last, there had been so many partings that there was no children left, and only the traveler, the gentleman, and the lady went upon their way in company. And now the wood was yellow, and now brown, and the leaves even of the forest trees began to fall. So they came to an avenue that was darker than the rest, and were pressing forward on their journey without looking down it when the lady stopped. "My husband," said the lady, "I am called." They listened, and they heard a voice a long way down the avenue say, "Mother, mother." It was the voice of the first child who had said, "I am going to heaven." And the father said, "I pray not yet. The sunset is very near. I pray not yet." But the voice cried, "Mother, mother," without minding him, though his hair was now quite white and tears were on his face. Then the mother, who was already drawn into the shade of the dark avenue and moving away with her arms still round his neck, kissed him and said, "My dearest, I am summoned and I go." And she was gone, and the traveler and he were left alone together. And they went on and on together until they came to very near the end of the wood, so near that they could see the sunset shining red before them through the trees. Yet once more, while he broke his way among the branches, the traveler lost his friend. He called and he called, but there was no reply. And when he passed out of the woods and saw the peaceful sun going down upon a wide purple prospect, he came to an old man sitting on a fallen tree. So he said to the old man, "What do you do here?" And the old man said with a calm smile, "I am always remembering. Come and remember with me." So the traveler sat down by the side of that old man, face to face with the serene sunset, and all his friends came softly back and stood around him. The beautiful child, the handsome boy, the young man in love, the father, mother, and children, every one of them was there, and he had lost nothing. So he loved them all and was kind and forbearing with them all, and was always pleased to watch them all, and they all honored and loved him. And I think the traveler must be yourself, dear grandfather, because this is what you do to us and what we do to you. The child's story. Now let us have a commercial here. And I'll leave you for a minute to kind of ponder over that story. Kind of was losing my voice there. Got to get a sip of water on our break there. So let us pause for a moment. I'll be right back with another story.
We all know smoking is harmful, right? But did you know that even after the smoke clears, the danger remains? This is called third-hand smoke. Third-hand smoke is the toxic residue left behind on surfaces like furniture, walls, or even clothes. These harmful chemicals can linger for days, weeks, or even months. Young children and pets are especially vulnerable. They can ingest these toxins simply by touching contaminated surfaces and then putting their hands or toys in their mouth. The best way to protect your loved ones? Make your home and car completely smoke-free. Remember, it's not just about the smoke you see, but the unseen toxins you leave behind. Protect your family from third-hand smoke. Choose a smoke-free environment.
All right, my name is Israel Valentin. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She, a good friend of mine inspired me to come to the program. The program is awesome. I learned a lot of how to be a better parent, and to be a better parent, to advocate to my daughter. Thanks to Millie for helping me in the process. And, I've been blessed to be with the HBU family. Thank you so much for everything to everybody at HBU, and continue being at HBU, and thank you.
Welcome back to Miss Cleo's Storytelling Corner. I hope you enjoyed that story, the child story, because that's an interesting story. And every time I read it or tell it, I get a certain feeling, and I'm beginning to get closer to the story. When I first read that story, it was several years ago, and I read it, but I didn't get it. It didn't. I didn't absorb it all. And maybe if you're first reading or first hearing, you don't absorb it all. But I guess as I got older, I began to absorb the story, and the story a little bit became my story, or the child's story. I think is everybody's story. Eventually, if we get to be of age, and we get to sit down and remember. So I hope you enjoyed that. And the next Dickens story I'm going to read, and this story I may read a little more clumsy, but I like the story, and I have to say that I was sick last week. This is my excuse, okay? I was sick last week, and I didn't have really a lot of time to study because I was resting. So I'm giving you my excuses for my fumbles right now before I start the story, okay? And I hope that you understand the story. It's called Nobody's Story. Nobody's Story, by Charles Dickens. He lived. I hope I have a voice. Let me just take another sip. He lived on the bank of a mighty river, broad and deep, which was always silently rolling on to a vast, undiscovered ocean. It had rolled on ever since the world began. It had changed its course sometimes and turned into new channels, leaving its old ways dry and barren. But it had ever been upon the flow, and ever was to flow until time should be no more. Against its strong, unfathomable stream, nothing made head. No living creature, no flower, no leaf, no particle of animate or inanimate existed, ever strayed back from the undiscovered ocean. The tide of the river set resistlessly toward it, and the tide never stopped any more than the earth stops in its circling round the sun. He lived in a busy place, and he worked very hard to live. He had no hope of ever being rich enough to live a month without hard work, but he was quite content, God knows, to labor with a cheerful will. He was one of an immense family, all of whose sons and daughters gained their daily bread by daily work, prolonged from their rising up to bedtime until their lying down at night. Beyond this destiny he had no prospect, and he sought none. There was overmuch drumming, trumpeting, and speech-making in the neighborhood where he dwelled, but he had nothing to do with that. Such clash and uproar came from the bigwig family at the unaccountable proceedings of which race he marveled much. They set up the strangest statues in iron, marble, brass, bronze before his door, and darkened his house with the legs and tails of unconscious images of horses. He wondered what it all meant, smiled in a rough, good-humored way he had, and kept at his hard work. Now the Bigelow family, composed of all the stateliest people thereabout and all the noisiest, had undertaken to save him the trouble of thinking for himself and to manage him and his affairs. "Why, truly," said he, "I have little time upon my hands, and if you will be so good as to take care of me in return for the money I pay over, for the Bigelow family were not above his money, I shall be relieved and much obliged, considering that you know best." Hence the drumming, trumpeting, and speech-making, and the ugly images of horses which he had expected to fall down and worship. "I don't understand all this," said he, rubbing his furrowed brow confusedly. "But it has a meaning, maybe, if I could find it out." "It means," returned the Bigelow family, suspecting something of what he said, "honor and glory in the highest, to the highest merit." "Oh," said he, and he was glad to hear that. But when he looked among the images in iron, marble, bronze, and brass, he failed to find a rather meritorious countryman of his, once the son of the Warwickshire wool dealer, or any single countryman whomsoever of that kind. He could find none of the men whose knowledge had rescued him and his children from terrific and disfiguring disease, whose boldness had raised his forefathers from the condition of serfs, whose wise fancy had opened a new and high existence to the humblest, whose skill had filled the working man's world with accumulated wonder, whereas he did find others whom he knew no good of, and even others whom he knew much ill of. Said he, "I don't quite understand it." So he went home and sat down by his fireside to get it out of his mind. Now, his fireside was a bare one, all hemmed in by blackened streets, but it was a precious place to him. The hands of his wife were hardened with toil, and she was old before her time, but she was dear to him. His children, stunted in their growth, bore traces of unwholesome nurture, but they were beautiful in his sight. Above all other things, it was an earnest desire of this man's soul that his children should be taught. If I am sometimes misled, said he, for want of knowledge, at least let them know better and avoid my mistakes. If it is hard to me to reap the harvest of pleasure and instruction that is stored in books, let it be easier for them. But the Bigwig family broke out into violent family quarrels concerning what it was lawful to teach to this man's children. Some of the family insisted on such a thing being primary and indispensable above all other things, and others of the family insisted on such another thing being primary and indispensable above all other things. And the Bigwig family rent into factions, wrote pamphlets, held convocations, delivered charges, or orations, and all varieties of discourses, impounded one another in court, lay and court ecclesiastical, threw dirt, exchanged pummelings, and fell together by the ears in unintelligible animosity. Meanwhile, this man, in his short evening snatches of his fireside, saw the demon in ignorance arise there and take his children to itself. He saw his daughter perverted into a heavy, slatterly drudge. He saw his son go moping down the way of low sensuality, to brutalize and crime. He saw the dawning light of intelligence in the eyes of his babies, so changing into cunning and suspicion that he could have rather wished them idiots. I don't understand this any the better, said he, but I think it cannot be right. Nay, by the clouded heavens above me, I protest against this as my wrong. Becoming peaceable again, for his passion was usually short-lived and his nature kind, he looked about him on his Sundays and holidays, and he saw how much monotony and weariness there was, and hence how drunkenness arose with all its train of ruin. Then he appealed to the Bigwig family and said, "We are a laboring people, and I have a glimmering suspicion in me that laboring people of whatever condition were made by a higher intelligence than yours, as I poorly understand it, to be in need of mental refreshment and recreation. So see what we fall into when we rest without it. Come, amuse me harmlessly. Show me something. Give me an escape. But here, the Bigwig family fell into a state of uproar, absolutely deafening, when some few voices were faintly heard proposing to show him the wonders of the world, the greatness of creation, the mighty changes of time, the workings of nature, and the beauties of art, to show him these things, that is to say, at any period of his life when he could look upon them. There arose among the bigwigs such roaring and raving, such palpering and petitioning, such mandering and memorializing, such name calling and dirt throwing, such a shrill wind of parliamentary questioning and feeble replying, where I dare not, waited on I would, that the poor fellow stood against, staring wildly around. Have I provoked all this? Said he, with his hands to his ears, by what was meant to be an innocent request, plainly arising out of my familiar experience and the common knowledge of all men who choose to open their eyes. I don't understand, and I am not understood. What is to come of such a state of things? He was bending over his work, often asking himself the question, when the news began to spread that a pestilence had appeared among the laborers and was slaying them by thousands. Going forth to look about him, he soon found this to be true. The dying and the dead were mingled in the close and tainted houses among which his life was passed. New poison was distilled into the always murky, always sickening air. The robust and the weak, old age and infancy, the father and the mother, all were stricken down alike. What means of flight had he? He remained there where he was, and saw those who were dearest to him die. A kind preacher came to him and would have said some prayers to soften his heart in his gloom, but he replied, "Oh, what availed it, missionary, to come to me, a man condemned to residence in this foetid place, where every sense bestowed upon me for my delight becomes a torment, and where every minute of my numbered days is new mire added to the heap under which I lie oppressed. But give me my first glimpse of heaven through a little of its light and air. Give me pure water. Help me to be clean. Lighten this heavy atmosphere and heavy life in which our spirits sink, and we become the indifferent and callous creatures you too often see us, gentle and kindly take the bodies of those who die among us out of the small room where we grow to be so familiar with the awful change that even its sanctity is lost to us. And teacher, then I will hear, none know better than you how willingly of him whose thoughts were so much with the poor and who had compassion for all human sorrow. There I'm going to stop and just take a small break, and I'll just finish up when we come back. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Menifee, and I am a new leader of the Hartford Parent University program. The program to me is very important because I feel like a lot of parents really need to get involved in their children's lives. I don't have younger children right now, but I do have grandkids. I have older children, and if this program was around back when my kids were smaller, even though they graduated from high school, I was very active, in their schools. I think a lot of parents would have been a lot more involved because this program actually gets parents involved. They do different programs that make you want to come, that make you want to be involved in your kids' programs. I have experienced some of the programs that they have to offer, and I might say I really enjoyed it, which I know my grandkids would really enjoy it. So this program is very, very important because the way things are going today, our kids really, really need their parents in their lives and focused on what it is that they're doing to help brighten their future.
Welcome back to Miss Cleo's Storytelling Corner and this challenging story to me this morning. Now we're going to finish up this story, but I just want to say one thing, and that is, if you have a problem, just keep reading. Now, Miss Cleo keeps reading because she likes the sound of words, whether she pronounces them wrong or not. The next time she reads it, she'll do it a little better, and the next time and that's the same with you. Don't get discouraged with reading. Don't get discouraged with reading. Just figure it out. Keep going. If you get the sense of the story, that's the bottom line. Get the sense of the story and keep on rushing through. Of course, Dickens, he has a different way of saying things, a little of his time, that we don't say things quite that way. But we're going to get through it, and we're almost finished with the story, and we ended and I'm going to continue with this story. For all human sorrow is what we stopped with. Here we go. He was at work again, solitary and sad, when his master came and stood near to him dressed in black. He also had suffered heavily. His young wife, his beautiful and good young wife, was dead, so too his only child. Master, 'tis hard to bear, I know it, but be comforted. I would give you comfort if I could. The master thanked him from his heart, but said he, O you laboring men, the calamity began among you. If you had but lived more healthily and decently, I should not be the widowed and bereaved mourner that I am this day. Master, returned the other, shaking his head. I have begun to understand a little that most calamities will come from us, as this one did, and that none will stop at our poor doors until we are united with that great squabbling family yonder to do the things that are right. We cannot live healthily and decently unless they who undertook to manage us provide the means. We cannot be instructed unless they will teach us. We cannot be rationally amused unless they will amuse us. We cannot but have some false gods of our own, while they set up so many of theirs in all the public places. The evil consequences of imperfect instruction, the evil consequences of pernicious neglect, the evil consequences of unnatural restraint, and the denial of humanizing enjoyment will all come from us, and none of them will stop with us. They will spread far and wide. They always do. They always have done, just like the pestilence. I understand so much, I think at last. But the Master said again, O you laboring men, how seldom do we ever hear of you except in connection with some trouble. Master, he replied, I am nobody, and little likely to be heard of, nor yet much wanted to be heard of, perhaps, except when there is some trouble. But it never begins with me, and it never can end with me. As such as death, it comes down to me, and it goes up from me. There was so much reason in what he said that the bigwig family, getting wind of it and being horribly frightened by the late desolation, resolved to unite with him to do the things that were right, at all events, so far as the said things were associated with the direct prevention, humanly speaking, of another pestilence. But as their fear wore off, which it soon began to do, they resumed their falling out among themselves and did nothing. Consequently, the surge appeared again, low down as before, and spread eventually upon as before, and carried off vast numbers of the brawlers. But not a man among them ever admitted, if in the least degree he ever perceived, that he had anything to do with it. So nobody lived and died in the old way. And this is the main, is the whole of nobody's story. Had he no name, you ask? Perhaps it was Legion. It matters little what his name was. Let us call him Legion. If you were ever in the Belgian villages near the field of Waterloo, you will have seen in some quite quaint little church a monument erected by faithful companions in arms to the memory of Colonel A, Major B, Captain C, D, and E, Lieutenant F and G, Henson H, I, and J, 7 non-commissioned officers, and 130 rank and file who fell in the discharge of their duty on Memorial Day. The story of nobody is a story of the rank and file of the earth. They bear their share of the battle. They have their part in the victory. They fall, they leave no name but in the mass. The march of the proudest of us leads to the dusty way by which they go. Oh, let us think of them this year at the Christmas fire, and not forget them when it is burnt out. Nobody's story. Now I suspect I will read that many times again by myself and read it with other people. But I hope that you got a sense of the story. And I hope that my faux pas there, don't let them bother you. Just go on. Go back, pick it up, learn it, and go on as the story gets clearer and clearer to you. If you have a sense of that story, I hope you got a little sense of the story. And knowing what Charles Dickens was trying to say in the child's story and in nobody's story. Well, that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you had a few smiles and laughs at my pronunciation, that's a good thing. You said, Miss Cleo, hey, get it next time. Yes, right. And the same to you. If you don't get it the first time, get it next time. Don't let anybody tease you about what you don't know. Oh, you didn't say that right. Oh, you did this. Oh, yeah. Keep on rolling. Look it up. Get the meaning. Keep on rolling. And pronounce it the best that you can. So, anyway, that was a lesson for you and a lesson for me. Probably next time I'll tell the story instead of read the story, but it's all there. So, I'm telling you, have a wonderful Christmas, Hanukkah, holiday. Enjoy yourself. Stay safe. Stay safe. I pray you're all with family and people that you love. And remember, read a little, write a little, and dream big. And I'll see you the new year, I guess. You have a wonderful holiday. See you next time.